Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to what I think is the fourth edition of CRA Mondays. Um, and today I'm very, very excited to have this edition featuring Fukami, who is going to talk to us about how he stopped worrying and decided and learned to love the NLF. He'll tell us, of course, a lot more about what the NLF is. For folks who have been trying to understand all of this policy world, the NLF stands for New Legislative Framework. It's a word that you've probably heard along with Blue Guide and along with a lot of other EU lingo. And those are the essentially the regulation and legislative frameworks that underpin and that sit below everything that the CRA is about. So it's really, really useful to better understand those. I hope at the end of this call we'll all feel much more educated on this topic. So without further ado, I want to welcome Fukami to give a presentation. We'll have a discussion at the end. Feel free to share questions in the chat. And Fukami, feel free to address them as you go or address them collectively at the end. Maybe please start by sharing a bit about yourself.
Okay, hello. Before I start, I would really like to highlight that is a very personal talk because it is about my discoveries over the last, I would say, 2 years. It contains a lot of higher level views and also contains a little bit of policy, and it's probably not exactly what some people expect, but let's see. I'm Fukami. I'm contracted as policy advisor at the OpenSSF and live in Brussels and enjoy the bubble as much as I can. I'm also a Type C member, like a number of people I see here in the discussion at the CRA expert group of the European Commission. I also became member at ETSI and an observer at Workgroup 9 and also at JTC 25 at Workgroup 2, that is data spaces. I also applied for rapporteur for 623, which is mood managers for the vertical standard. And I'm also first liaison and co-chair of the AI Security Special Interest Group. At first, that is primarily looking at AI and security context. The reason why I have that strange intersection is I worked most of my life at Section 1, doing pen testing, source code audits, consultancy, reverse engineering, so on. Then I worked for a year as information security officer at eBrains, which are basically the human brain project. And over, I don't know, like more than 2 decades, I used to be a digital rights advocate in Brussels. So that is a reason why I have a fairly good understanding of processes and how to do things. But in the beginning, I want to introduce the OpenSSF to understand what that organization actually is. That is a cross-industry collaboration that was founded after a couple of supply chain incidents as part of the Linux Foundation. It is very technical. In so far as it produces like actual pieces of technology that you can use and also a lot of guidance and educational material. The last part that I really recommend people to look at is a course on the CRA, but it's also a lot of things that relate to security development. The landscape of the initiatives of the OpenSSF are, how you see, like very close to everything that relates to build processes, packaging, dependency management, and so on. So and an overview over the tools that exist is on this side, and what you may wonder why the OpenSSF is engaged also in policy is, of course, and like standardization and following all of these processes, of course, to build tools to make it easier for people to comply and to have a more secure supply chain. In order to understand where I'm coming from, I would like to explain a little bit what I've done in the past. So I primarily focused on the time between, from the proposal to the moment where a proposal, went through the co-legislative process and until it was published. And I didn't really follow up in any meaningful way what was happening afterwards so far. So these processes are those that I'm not very familiar with in terms of how they actually, how they are, how they unfold and what to do in what moment and who are the actors. What is missing here on that timeline is the standardization. The part that I actually, where I took also a lot of my understanding of the implementation and evaluation of European legislation. And when I can say one thing is that what I learned is the understanding of the implementation and evaluation already has an effect when I look into proposals that are coming out in order to with the understanding of what that process is. So that means my whole understanding what to do, when, who to talk to, what to address significantly changed due to the experience that I have with that particular part of the legislative timeline. So when I started to have that job, I see Alex is here. So one of the things that we had very, very early was, the CRA is basically CE for software. But what does that mean? So, and how is that meaningful? Beside if you know what C is, roughly, it's like what you see on, like electronics and stuff. But how does that relate to software and how does that fit into the whole, stuff that is going on EU level? So one thing that I did not use, but it exists now is, that exists as a thing on EULX is the relationship graph. That is basically a list of cited and amended or corrected or proposals that relate to the CRA. There is someone doing noises. I don't know who that is.
Yeah, can you folks make sure that you're muted? Thank you.
So what I used was just a little bit of handwork that some people know as a sheet where all of these things are listed and roughly what they are, what they do. And also I've followed a couple of things and I got a bunch of questions what this or that piece of legislation is. So at one point I came up with this, which is basically grouped into the actors that are named in some form or another, everything that is related to products and services. Then a bunch of technical terms and and then something that is more like tied to cybersecurity. But what I primarily looked at where was everything that is like open source and the term products with digital elements. So, and you already see that there are a number of cross sections, and I'm going to nail them or like, show them in a little bit more detail. So the first three that you see is what I understand for myself as a base software, European software regulation. So that is a CRA for security, that is the AI Act for safety, and the PLD that includes defective software, especially security, as a part where a manufacturer is going to be liable. It took me a moment to understand AI as a safety regulation, but how I think you have to understand it is probably security is something like, I don't know, protecting secrets or something. But an AI system might tell your kid to eat glue. So that is not a security issue. That is clearly a safety, clearly in the safety space. However, the other two regulations that are clearly, like using open source in that context is the NIS2 directive and the Cybersecurity Act that was also amended by MSS, which is the managed service security services, which means that is like security services and DNS that was amended into the. No, that's not true. They are only the services. The Implementation Act of NIS2 actually amended DNS into NIS. And you see that they use open source as well there. And then there are a couple of things that don't mention software at all, but they are important for the understanding of the NLF. That is the standardization regulation, that is CE. That is also the representative actions and the market surveillance regulation. There's also what I did not mark here actually is what is called the general product safety regulation and eco design. That is I forgot the acronym, the ESPR. And then what just appeared was their data regulations. So that means IDAS and already didn't. They are directly mentioned in the CRA. And the EHDS, which is the European Health Data Space, amends into the CRA. And the GDPR is a piece of regulation that is also mentioned in the CRA because of personal data. Any questions so far? Okay, so that was my own like kind of way to understand that there is kind of a relation between all of these type of things. And but before we move on, there is one thing that is also a little like personal discovery. So, and it is not meant as like any bad mouthing or whatever. Like so far, the cooperation with the Commission is fantastic. It's just a minor detail that kind of popped up a couple of times. So there is that picture used for the depictions of cheese as, and the holes in cheese as vulnerabilities. The thing is that in Europe, there's a regulation for cheese holes. So they have to have a certain colors, and they have to have a certain amount. So that is not what the CRA is. The CRA is not about making, like the holes green or whatever. It is, and I find it confusing to use pictures from other things that are so close, or in general, the confusion is big enough between the lingo that you have in legislation and that you have in real technology or real world like objects. And this is so close as an example for what I also experienced and gave me a little bit of headache. That is that term, for example, service, what the service actually is, and what it means. For a technician, it means something completely different than it is for a regulator or maybe for a data protection officer or something. Same as platform, because in some contexts, it's actually a term that is used in a legal context, and in the technical context, it might be something entirely different. So for me, there is a little bit that thing about, like trying to either have at least translation tables that are like, and make clear what you are talking about, and not trying to use memes that actually make it a little bit more difficult sometimes to people to understand the right thing. In the past, especially the Germans, I think, still suffer under the idea of information highways. So everything that is digital infrastructure ended up with the autobahns. So I think that is an important thing to frame things in the right way. And I'm not sure if a cheese is really the right description for it. Okay, now we come to the actual topic of the talk. So the NLF is a framework for the internal market of goods that is primarily to have a market surveillance that is able to take things off the market, to have a structure that is able to check for quality, security, and so on, and also boosting the general process that is behind it, to get the products on the market in the proper way and means. So for people who are born before the 80s or something, the old approach was basically in Europe, when you wanted to import goods into a country, you needed to talk to the national authorities, how they would allow that to happen. And you had a lot of declarations when you had a cross-border transfer and so on. Then at one point, that is actually not EU. I think that was either the Council of Europe or OECD, where they came up with the new approach. That means that for the movement of goods, to come up with a couple of principles. More on this on the next slide. The next level then, end of the 80s, was the global approach, conformity assessment instruments that strengthened and made it more clear how that this conformity assessment works better across Europe. And mid 2000, the new legislative framework was more clearly defined, I would say, and still has a new approach principles, and it's just the extension of it to a certain extent. So the new the new approach principles are relatively simple in my point of view. So front and foremost, the harmonization, so the harmonized standards, that is all limited to the essential requirements. That means that other obligations that you have from a product regulation in the CRA, for example, vulnerability handling is not necessarily, or like, depends on what detail it is. Can you please? So only for them the standards are provided, and only those who fulfill these requirements may be placed on the market. The important part with the harmonized standards is also they are voluntary. What that actually means is you have also other ways of doing this, but it is a lot more complicated. You have to come up with your explanation that works for whoever does the assessment. And following standards is just the easiest way to do. And as when you follow these standards and they are nationalized, then you have a presumption of conformity. That means, and this is like the thing, if you follow them properly, if you have done that the right way, and then something happens, although you did all of this, you are not liable. So manufacturers are very free in how they can do that assessment. It depends on the top level product that they have. When they look from the CRA perspective, then they have the modules that are in Annex 8, so A, B, C, and H. So at its core, that is what the new approach principles are. A couple of terms that I use in all of these type of legislations. So the making available on the market is a very, very broad concept. That means that is a transfer, and it does not need to be a transfer that also exchanges money. The placing on the market is the actual time of the introduction to the market. That means if a manufacturer, for example, ships it to a distributor, and it is then by the distributor put onto the market in various forms. And the putting into service or use is the actual use that all matters in terms of the time for how long certain like guarantees or so have to be there, or how long the obligations exist. The market only works, or like is only meant for the economic operators to have any obligations. So that they are manufacturers, authorized representatives, importers, and distributors. They are also fulfillment centers that came into the Blue Guide. So this is everything that's not post, but helps with like storage and stuff like this. And the CRA, as everybody here probably knows, also introduced a new actor, the open source software steward. So the result of my sheet that I built is this with, and now that I know a lot more and had a little bit of more time to look into it, I realized that there are mistakes on that beautiful picture. So what I try to do here is, in general, to understand what is in the CRA, who is involved, what are the actors of what in what context or on what level. So the general thing, everything in blue is on the European level, everything is red is the national level. The yellow parts are the economic actor with a clear operation on the market. The green ones are the open source, like objects, or however they call them, and the consumer. So and when I started to build this, the first thing that popped out was like clearly that every arrow points to market surveillance. And the manufacturer has a lot of things to do. And since there's only the CRA, you will see why I have the second part of the talk that goes a little bit more into what's going on right now. However, that helped me a lot to picture what is there, who talks to who, what should you have in mind if you want to understand how to help or introduce things, how to find potential, like a lack of communication, I would say, or awareness. And so for that was very helpful. And I really need to kind of like streamline that at one point, and to get the things right. So everybody who knows a little bit, what is wrong here? What do you think? Any ideas? Okay, you can also mail me. The summary of the NLF. So that it is a common framework. It does not mean that every product has to have all the things in there, but the understanding that I have is that it more and more gets like that framework that you just choose in order to have every type of legislation that also moves more and more into the area of services, although like services not in the sense of the DSA, DMA, but in terms of services in a technical sense. And beside enhanced market surveillance and all of the conformity stuff, including the standardization, what it also contains, what I did not touch as much is eco-design and sustainability principles that also play a role in standardization now with the digital product, the digital product passport, which is going to be, in my point of view, one of the compliance in the documents down the line of, I would say, 5 to 10 years, but it is going to come as such, I'm pretty sure. The other thing is the multiple recognition of goods. For some goods, you need to have the recognition by a member state still, but there are procedures to make that easier. Also, the representative actions, which is basically like class actions, it's like basically the same thing. There are accessibility requirements, and probably one of the interesting concepts that not very many people talk about, but that could play also a role later down the line in the CRA, and they called regulatory sandboxes. This is meant as the idea that when you have a technology that has a lot of regulation around it, and it may not need to comply to all of it because it's so special, that you get a certain oversight and also a certain way how to look into it to shape that that product or service in a way that it complies and is still and still does not need to maybe fulfill all of the rules that would usually be a part of compliance. What you want to read in order to understand what the NLF is and how that actually boils down to what the manufacturer needs to do. There is the Blue Guide that now in the version of 2022 and with the CRA and everything around it in terms of standardization, certification, and so on, will find its way in one form or another into the next version, or maybe there's even an extra Blue Guide that only touches software or something like this. Because everybody who is involved in that type of process realizes how many things need to be touched also to make that work. So far, any questions? Because the next part is all about what's going on now. So maybe we should, if there's more specific Blue Guide questions, talk about it now. But you can also, if you like, do that on the end. What's the mood here? Check.
I'm not hearing, I'm not seeing very many questions in the chat so far. So I guess you can. Oh, this is a good question, actually. Daniel is asking whether there's going to be an update to the Blue Guide soon.
So I do not believe that will really happen soon, but there will be iterations towards that. I believe. On one hand, the Commission works on a guide for open source, and its use, and also the guidance from NIDA from the Interbank Act is there, and so on. So that is a slow build-up, but I believe I would say maybe mid-2026 or something, they are going to start with that. In the moment, there are other priorities than that specific piece of document, I would say. And you will see in the next part why that is. Any more questions?
Salve is asking about
yeah,
the open source guidance.
So in the moment, we cannot go into details, unfortunately, but not by now. But so the Commission, I'm not sure if that's a work strand or if that is part of the expert group meeting.
It
There's
is
so
a
much
work
going on.
strand. It is a
Okay,
work strand of the CRA expert group. We discussed it in the org sig right before this call.
Okay. So So
yes.
that's why I didn't join this.
No, that's entirely fine. I'm just trying to provide broader context here, also for people who will be listening to the recording of this presentation. Indeed, the CRA mandates that the Commission creates guidance on a number of topics, one of which is open source, and it is working on this guidance and getting expert input through the CRA expert group on this topic. I don't think so. There is public information in the minutes of those calls about it, but not a lot that is shareable outside of what's minuted right now. But essentially, as part of the CRA, the CRA's implementation, the Commission has to provide guidance on open source and topics that are relevant to open source, and it is doing so right now. So I think that's like the most that we can say at this point.
Yes, I believe the process here might be that they get in input from the experts, then they publish something, and then there is kind of a public comment period.
That's
I'm not
very
sure
possible.
as what that is actually published. That's like I'm not exactly sure if that's like an act or just a guidance.
It's just guidance. It is not an act. The outcome of this, as far as I understand, and part of the questions we will have for the commission in the next CRA expert group is precisely to ask if they have a sense of when it's going to be published and whether there's going to be broader community input that's possible before the final document. So yes, 100% it would be useful to know more about this.
Okay. Any more questions? Okay. New single market strategy. So that came out, I believe, last week, but it is, of course, a continuation of the Commission work program. So what that is supposed to do is to boost European the ability of European companies to be more competitive, and that is aligned to a bunch of things that that as mentioned are in the Commission work in our program as priorities in the area of the digital packages or the digital package as in a whole. The terrible tendency is an extra slide. So what that single market strategy contains is a lot of practical changes for stakeholders. Why does that matter? So when you remember that sheet about all of the regulation that you have that is only very high level what is there, but when you have a certain product, and if you have composite products or if you have like a number of different products, it can get very, very complicated very fast. So that the things that you have to do in what way, when you have to report to whom, and the challenge here is to, on one hand, not change too much, so don't let like obligations go, but make stuff kind of put them into one process from the viewpoint of a stakeholder, but also to use these type of adjustment and changes to support exactly the areas of economics in Europe that are vital and that are the actual economics of Europe. And these are SMEs and what they call SMCs. In the moment, whenever you look at European regulation, also from my perspective, now that I looked into it in greater detail and like on a very, very broad level, a lot of it is meant to deal with large organizations, and the way how that functions at the end is still that as SMEs, it's like difficult. You might have a relatively low entry barrier, but for growth, for everything where you need to like grow your business, it gets complicated as soon as you get into like the next level and so on. And this is something from my first like view into that strategy and also into the implementing the directive that they propose is actually very interesting. I think that especially for that whole thing about SMEs and small and medium caps, is a discussion that also belongs into org as well as Linux Foundation and other foundations that focus on what's going on in the CRA, how things go and where the actual problems are. On the other hand, the CRA itself is, especially from the viewpoint of open source and open source business models, a way to make that work. And this is explicitly seen in some of the things that they tackle in terms of how you can position your business, what are the growth projections. And on the other hand, what beside like removing or like reducing red tape, is that they would like the member states to take more ownership on particular cooperation and enforcement, because especially also seen with the CRA, where you do have a couple of member states. Of course, you always have a couple of member states that are better able or like capable or also interested in enforcing certain regulations. Moving forward for a strong like digital market, and this is like where a lot of the questions and criticisms came in terms of when people offer goods on Amazon or whatever, and it has a CE mark, you it's still like counterfeit. So that is an actual problem, no question. So how does that work in the software space? What is going on there, and so on? So that the questions that come there they also shake what the new legislative framework actually is, but it shakes, in my point of view, in a good way. It shakes it because there are a number of things that go in parallel that should like be more focused on the obligations that manufacturers in this case, or like other stakeholders, have, and make it like more efficient. But on the other hand, I am a big fan of some of these regulations that are there for product safety and security, or like in general, I'm a fan of this type of approach. Last but not least, the whole part of how the EU is going to spend money, and that does not include defense. That is just the spending on certain instruments that let me check, the EU has. That is the European Fund for Strategic Investments, that is a Connecting Europe facility, and for the then Invest EU, and also Horizon Europe for the research. And one of the things that they address there explicitly is that they want to look at better synergies between all of these instruments, and also to make that work in the bigger goal of competitiveness and getting European companies a better position. Second. So I mentioned the terrible 10, and I find it really, really interesting as a thing, because in one form or another, we have that discussion in all types of ways. What is like, what is the problem with the European internal market? Sorry. So the terrible 10 are the outcome of the consultation that took place in 2022, and they are like the top 10 things that were kind of identified in the consultation process. And when you go through them, you will clearly see that one or the other directly hits you. For example, overly complex EU rules. I mean, like, yeah, especially if you need to try to explain things to people, then you realize how complex it is, because certain aspects require an understanding of very many different kind of things at the same time. And the problem here is also that you easily miss rules that are there, that may or may not be a big problem for bigger companies. It is likely a bigger problem than it is for small ones, but still. Then, yeah, the other thing that I also recognized during the last 1.5 years, that is a whole thing about the professional qualifications in Europe. The way how you compare what type of qualification, and especially when they pop up and vanish like on a monthly base or something. Another important one that is important for me insofar as that is connected to a mistake that I did very, very early in the beginning. I already mentioned it, the DPP, the Digital Product Passport, the fragmented rules on packaging, labeling, and waste. That is the way how yeah, all of these goods are kind of have the identification, and usually for example, electronic goods, you have like little numbers on them, but for a bunch of other things, it does not work that well. So the whole idea is to make a lot of this more digital, and the digital product passport is primarily meant as an eco design and sustainability instrument to be able, for example, for recycling or reuse of goods. But of course, it is capable of also storing like the software supply chain parts, and it also contains not just the documents but also the procedures. Then what was the other one the territorial not supply constraints. So that what you also have in member states is that some member states say, oh, we only want products that come from that and that background. And that is something that the European Commission doesn't really like, because it is actually not in line with the single market principles. And that is something that also a lot of stakeholders in that in the consultation noted that in certain areas that is like a larger problem. So there are, about what I talked here, there are on one hand the two like communication or like communiques. That one is the Commission work program. The other one is the single market paper, which this is the glorious title, a strategy for making the single market simple, seamless, and strong. And compared or connected to it, they are two consultation processes going on. There is one on the Omnibus Directive for aligning product legislation, and yeah, with the digital age. So that is exactly our kind of playground. And the other thing is the competitiveness for like SMEs and SMCs. Yeah. Any questions? Because this is where I am finished with my talk.
The timing is perfect. We have sort of like 9 minutes to have a discussion around this and ask some questions. Well, first of all, Thank you very much for sharing all of this information and sort of like the journey, your journey, and better understanding how all of this works and plays together. I'm curious if folks have specific questions on sort of the content that you shared today. So Adrian, do you want me to just read your question, or do you want to jump in and ask it yourself?
No, you
That is an
can.
excellent.
Yeah, no, I think it's just, I think in the simplification thing, I saw some mentions around, common specifications, and there was an answer back from Etsy towards it. So I'm just wondering, based on everything that's happening at the simplification, is this kind of common specifications thing, how do you see that playing out, Fukami, in terms of becoming more of a norm versus harmonized standards sometime in the future?
That is a very, very good question. For me, that is a little bit hard to predict what is really at the end of that process. So because when you look at the CRA standardization and how to make that work, and and what problems you have on the ground, I would say to kind of get it the right way, I would say. And on the other hand, you have a lot of things that just are not set up the right way. For example, the market surveillance authorities, although that is probably not a big problem. But you need to have a lot of assessment capabilities. You need to have a lot of certification capabilities that are in the moment not there. And on the other hand, there's that thing about the way how a lot of the how to say, the specific parts that you have in the supply chain, for example. The question here is if it all can be done with standards anyways. Also, because a lot of the development that you have in that space, what is state of the art? And I believe that will, especially when it really starts to hit, that itself needs to have a process that can more quickly adapt than the current procedures, I would say.
Yeah, it's interesting with the possible revision of 1025. So 1025 is the regulation that essentially states the roles that ESOs, the European Standardization Organizations, which are currently Synthetic and Etsy, have. So there's a possible revision that's coming up, and there were discussions on this topic, and I think there was an open call for whether it needed to be revised or not. I think that that's also going to, maybe help address this question, Adrian. Um, and the broader question of how can we improve European standardization in a way that's more aligned and that fits better with how the IT sector in general, and software and open source are designed, and how that works. Because clearly that there are some gaps here, and some misalignments and problems. So that's, if you have interest in that space, like paying attention to 1025 and the ongoing conversations around this topic would be helpful too.
Yeah, and also what I would like to add is that there's so much in parallel going on, and it is a little bit. I like that picture. We are in a plane where we assemble the wheels for landing in 2.5 years. And because everything in the moment is really like in motion, or not everything, but a lot of what is there. The CRA is one of the stable parts, I would say, because that is a very modern regulation. But the things to make everything work needs to be adjusted. And the question here is in what steps and, like with what like goal in the next, I don't know, 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think having been involved for a little over a year at this point, your image is quite a good one. Um, and I think everyone understands, that's whether that's the commission or the standards bodies themselves, or possibly market surveillance, that we have to figure this out together, and figure out solutions that work for the CRA, but that actually also work for the broader industry, the open source ecosystem on which Europe relies, and that really help align everyone's everyone, so that this actually works out and creates like good outcomes, right? Better security and better cyber resilience for products, for users on the EU market, but also to your point, like ties into EU innovation and all of these other aspects. So it's quite clearly a challenge that we're all sort of into.
What I wanted to mention again, what you see here is an average between, I would say, 8 to 10 years. And the interesting bit that when you are in this type of process, especially in the second half, there is always a connection back to square one. And what is happening right now is exactly that connection. So there are a lot of these so-called omnibus packages. What we have seen here with the SMEs is number 4. The other ones were like corporate sustainability, and number 2, as I said, the investment stuff, omnibus 3 agriculture, and this is like the part that is most relevant for us, or like for the community here, I would say, because it has the strongest connection to the what's going on the ground, I would say. But this is like a good overview over how also what the red spots, kind of where you have the public discussion, and then for a while nothing really happens, at least not visibly, and then again you have like the public conscious to a certain extent, like media press that gives the attention, or stakeholders that are there to make noise. Yeah, any other question?
I think we're at the top of the hour, and that we're ready to wrap. So I'd like to very much thank you again, Fukami, for joining us and for sharing this. Any sort of like last thing you want to add, or last comment before we close this?
Yeah, I hope that this little talk was not so much about, like what is what. It's more like, like everyone needs to build their own picture of what's happening there, their own perception of it, and so on. And there is a need and a great value in sharing these type of experiences, I believe. So I hope that other people also, like share also their misunderstanding about things, because I believe if I learned something during the last 2 years, it was all because of my misconceptions that I had. So yeah, thank you very much for letting me present my spaghetti.
No, thank you very much. And I heard like a call for other people to come and share, their travel and understanding and policy, and moving into that space. So if there are folks that want to share, a similar story and have can bring an insightful light on some additional areas or topics, I think that would be great. Just reach out to me. If not, I think I'll bid you all goodbye and see you in 2 weeks for our next CRA Monday, which will be on Salsa, and we'll have Arnold or come and give us some input on this a piece of software and specs, and hopefully clear some misconceptions about it, and help us all better understand it. So thanks again, Fukami, for joining us today. Thank you all for joining this call and listening to this really interesting conversation. And I'll see you in 2 weeks. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye bye, and thank you.
Thanks all.